You are listening to the Enormocast.
You know, there's too many ways that ice climbing is miserable. The screaming barfies, somehow being sweaty and freezing at the same time, and the Norwegian death metal your partner is cranking on the dark drive to the trailhead. But with help from Sportiva, your boot performance and the comfort of your precious piggies can be resolutely checked off the blood-scrawled manifesto of ice climbing horrors. From big routes to next-gen tech climbing, Sportiva has created a line of futuristic mountain boots with old-school reliability and durability, like the warm all-arounder, the Nepal Cube GTX. So let's face it, at some point in the day, you're going to moan with pain. But let's make sure it's not because of your feet. Swipe right to Sportiva.com or your nearest high-end climbing retailer to slip your hooves into a pair of these majestic boots. And remember, when you support Sportiva, you support the Enormocast. Hey climbers, that rock that you lovingly caress every weekend is just never going to love you back. Of course, it's never going to suddenly ask you what you're thinking right now either. But devoting even a tenth of that energy into an actual human relationship might be a better bet in terms of love and companionship, no matter what your alpinist friends say. Peter W. Gilroy is here to help. Climber and jewelry maker, Peter can hook you up with just the right gift for that human in your life who just smiles when you get home late from the crag, or who says, "No, you're still hot," when you're clearly chubby and out of shape and stink of failure, or who's still belaying you even though you're falling lower and lower on your proj. Inspired by the rocks we climb and the mountains we love, Peter's jewelry and accessories might be just the thing to convince your significant other that you're not an obsessive crazy person in love with inanimate objects. So go to peterwgilroy.com and enter Enormo at checkout for a discount on art you can wear and to help the Enormocast.
We gotta get
Listen, where you playing in town? You playing here?
We're doing the Enormo Dome, whatever it is. It's terrific.
Oh,
It's
yeah, the
big
big
house. We
place,
sold
that
it out.
side of town. That's a
Very
big
nice.
place. You sold it out.
20,000
seats.
We really should.
Look, you better get up there before you panic. Those pens are loose. You're very good. I have really enjoyed climbing with you. We'll make it. I don't think so. But we shall continue with style. Bad weather. No, later, anytime for climbing.
Today's show is brought to you by La Sportiva with support from Maxim Ropes and our friends at Bonfire Coffee. Go to bonfirecoffee.com, enter Enorma at checkout to get a discount on great coffee and to support the Enormocast. Hello and welcome to the Enormocast. This is your host, Chris Calhoun. It is February 19th in Colorado. It is 9 o'clock, and this is episode 123 of the Enormocast, a conversation with alpinist Kitty Calhoun. I ran into Kitty up at the Cody Ice Fest, which I went to a couple weeks ago, or last week. I don't know. Time somehow goes by very quickly and very slowly at the same time these days. Very elastic time. Anyway, was up at the Cody Ice Fest, ran into Kitty in the airport actually on the way there, and we ended up hanging out a bunch because she was staying at the same place, and I managed to get an interview one afternoon, which was awesome. And I wanted to also thank Ari Novak and the folks at the Ice Fest for having me up there, treating me with incredible hospitality, and didn't go ice climbing. They had some really challenging conditions up there with a bunch of snow that week and then really warm weather, so a bunch of avalanche danger on the ice. Guides had to make a lot of tough calls, but I think there was some real avalanche activity that justified their calls on not getting on a bunch of the ice gullies. So instead of dry tooling, which is what a lot of folks were doing, I went dry tooling with my hands and feet in the canyon there outside of town with some locals who showed me around, which was awesome. I want to give a shout out to them as well. And yeah, so I didn't ice climb at the Ice Climbing Fest. Is anybody surprised by that? Anybody? I actually was really pretty excited to do it until I started hearing about how the ice was a little bit funky and or really dangerous. So I think they might have gotten around to ice climbing on Sunday, and I'd already left by then. So alas, fun time anyway. Thanks again for having me up there. Hope folks enjoyed the presentation I gave, and happy to come to your festival if the timing is right. Just let me know. Hey, other piece of business. Guess what? I'm going to Spain next week with the Enormo family, which should be a lot of fun, and I'm actually going to go rock climbing, I hope. So that's going to be pretty exciting, and I'm going to try to get some interviews over there with some Euro climbers, some folks that I don't get to run into very often. And the only other little caveat is that the next episode might be a little bit late, but do I even have a schedule anymore? I've been shooting for the 5th and the 20th lately, but you guys who listen know that changes occasionally. So don't get too bent out of shape if the next one's a little bit late, but February's short anyway. All right, Kitty Calhoun, alpinist. Been in the game a long time. Got into the game when alpinism was a man's world, but carved out her own career. She was the first American woman on Dhaulagiri, 8,000-meter peak in Nepal, as well as leading expedition up Makalu and countless lower but highly technical peaks all around the world. South America, Alaska, you name it. So she's been inspiring climbers, inspiring women climbers in particular, and her career has taken her to part ownership of Chicks with Picks, an outfit out of Southwest Colorado that tailors ice climbing and mountaineering curriculum specifically for women, trying to help them become independent leaders, stewards of the environment. She's a self-described former debutante. And let me tell you something, Calhoun is not a name they sneeze at down there in South Carolina. I believe she is descended fairly directly from old John C. Calhoun, a Southern pre-Civil War politician, vice president a couple times, I know, at least under Jackson. I'm pretty sure. I could probably Google that, but I'm going to just go with it as my memory serves me. So I think that lineage just makes her journey into the big mountains that much more interesting. Enjoyed hanging out with her, enjoyed listening to her, and I hope you guys do too. So here's an interview with Kitty Calhoun. We'll just go ahead and start right in.
Okay.
So I watched your TED Talk to get a little information. And in the beginning of that, you talked a lot about these labels was how you opened it. And I'm not sure whether those were ones you were giving yourself or ones you'd heard. But as a little girl growing up in South Carolina, you said debutante, Southern Belle, sorority girl, conservative, these sort of labels that then in the TED Talk, you transitioned into talking about how, you'd then moved into your truck or your Subaru, and you became this climber. And, I like that you were setting up these sort of what I think everyone else perceives as a contradiction. But can you talk about that upbringing and that sort of those worlds maybe that you were being brought up in, and how you ended up in that Subaru, despite maybe these other paths that would have obviously led you in a very different direction if you'd continued on sort of the debutante path, if you will?
Yeah, well, my dad was a big influence in my life. So I did, he was a lawyer. He was conservative, but at the same time, he liked to get out and ski, and there weren't many skiers at the time, and he took me out and did a lot of things with me. So I did grow up going to a private Episcopal school, and sororities were big. And I had a hard time fitting in, but I just pursued my interest in sports, and then became captain of the field hockey team. And at the same time, I didn't like staying around on weekends and being involved in the social scene. I preferred to go skiing with my dad on the weekends in North Carolina. And so there was sort of part of me that was part of the social scene at a private school in Greenville, South Carolina, but then there was the other part of me on the weekends that would take off with my dad to go skiing in the mountains in a time when skiing wasn't very popular. Not many people did it. And so,
well, especially in South Carolina.
Right.
Not like a total mecca for skiing that I come up with.
Yeah, except that
Yeah.
North Carolina has the highest mountain on the East Coast, and so there's good skiing in the mountains. They depend on snowmaking a lot. But so anyway, I took to skiing and being in the mountains, and also my dad was a minimalist, and so when he packed to go skiing, he'd just bring a ski bag and it'd be stuffed with his underwear and a change of clothes, and then he had his briefcase that had his toothpaste in it and his toothbrush, and he didn't travel with very much, and I sort of took after that and became a minimalist myself. And I don't know if I was just born that way or I modeled after my dad, but those were traits that were sort of also opposite of the kind of lavish lifestyle that I could have lived growing up in the South. Yeah.
What about climbing? Like, when did that sort of come onto your radar as something besides skiing to do in the mountains?
So I took a course, an Outward Bound, North Carolina Outward Bound course when I graduated from high school, and I was intrigued by it. It seemed challenging. The thing that I was most afraid of was the climbing part, because I was afraid of heights, and I decided, well, I guess I liked challenges. That's maybe what drew me to the Outward Bound school. And I decided, well, I'm just going to be as prepared as I can be. So I started running, and I was running 8 miles a day by the time I went to that course. And I think that I was really able to just enjoy the course and soak in everything that it had to offer. And when I got to the climbing part, I learned that if I just didn't look down and only focused on the next move that I had to make, that I could get through it. And I decided I wanted to keep climbing.
Now, so you have this dad who's super into skiing. Did you have any siblings?
Yeah, but none of them went in the direction that I did, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, was that something that then he saw as like, oh, I'm gonna encourage this? Or where was your sort of? I mean, you're out of high school now, so you're getting to be where you're on your own. Was there sort of, oh, this is great, she's found something she's in love with, or we wish that maybe Kitty would go in some direction that we had planned for her?
I guess my dad assumed that all of us would get married and marry, into upper middle class, and we'd just be the typical housewife and whatever. But he didn't push anything on us. He just said that whatever you do, just do your best. And so he never really expressed an opinion one way or the other, as long as we were doing our best and having fun. So I know that both my parents were concerned about me a lot of times. I mean, I would tell them what I was up to. I didn't hide anything, and I think that put a lot of stress on them, but they managed pretty well.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah.
Okay. So where did this transition then happen in terms of, so you got a little taste of climbing. It becomes this thing that, helps you get over your fears. How soon and what did the transition look like into, this life as a climber? Outward Bound runs thousands of kids through a climbing program a year, and a few of them, say, this is like what I'm going to do. What did the transition look like from those first moments of like, this is pretty cool and is meaningful to me, to being in that Subaru?
So I went to University of Vermont because I'd put a dot on the map of the United States in blue where all the universities were, and a dot in red where all the ski areas were, and UVM had the most red dots around it. Okay. So I went to University of Vermont for this because there were a lot of good ski areas there, and I was skiing there. I had a season pass. My second year there, the winter wasn't very good, and so I got a refund on my season pass, and I'd met an ice climber, and so went out ice climbing, and I really liked the adventure, and I realized that I was kind of bored standing in lift lines at ski areas. It had gotten popular, and so I liked the adventure, the challenge, the beauty, the partnership with my partner, all those things about ice climbing and climbing in the winter in particular. Ice climbing, and so I kept doing that, and then right before I finished school, I finished in the winter, a semester early, I went alpine climbing with somebody that I didn't know. He's like, oh yeah, let's go do the presidential traverse in winter in a single push on a full moon.
Okay.
So I said, okay. And then I was thinking, well, what's the worst thing that could happen? And I thought, well, the worst thing that could happen would be something would happen to this guy, something bad, and would be above tree line, and I'd have to like get in a sleeping bag with him and warm him up. We weren't taking anything. I decided we really need to take 2 sleeping bags because I wasn't attracted to him. I didn't want to get a sleeping bag with him. And so we each brought a sleeping bag and a bunch of food. And so we ended up above tree line near the top of Mount Washington, and it was windy. We were post-holing, and he ran out of energy, and he was getting hypothermic. He was stumbling and not talking coherently. And so I said, okay, let's just get to the top of Mount Washington, and then we'll stop and take a nap. And we got to the top, to the observatory, and it was locked up. We couldn't get inside, so I found this sheltered corner. He got in a sleeping bag, and I was just going to let him sleep for a couple hours. I was going to stay up and wake him up in a couple hours. And this was around midnight, or it must have been later. And then I fell asleep myself. And then I woke up, and I was shivering really bad. I couldn't stop shivering. So I started doing jumping jacks, and I was still shivering uncontrollably. And then I ate a Snickers bar. I have a lot of Snickers bar stories.
Yeah.
And
the original energy bar.
Yeah, I know. I should get sponsored, huh? And
yeah,
so
they got some money.
Then, yeah, right. And so then actually I warmed up immediately. So I learned that you really do need calories, you know, above exercise to warm yourself up. And I warmed up, and then got him up, and we bailed. But in the meantime, the sun came up, and it was one of the most memorable sunrises I've ever seen. I mean, the sky was just fiery red. It was really gorgeous. And so I decided that because of, you know, the beauty and the challenge and the adventure, that I wanted to learn more about alpine climbing in the wintertime. So I decided that when I graduated in December, I would just move out west, live in my Subaru, and go alpine climbing.
And so when you first were doing this, and also your first ice climbing experience, what year was this about? Just to give us an idea of where you're...
Date me, but it was like late 70s, early 80s.
Okay, yeah. So we're, you know, ice climbing was a very different game than what we're looking at these days, obviously. Yeah. Even from, you know, my ice climbing was in the early 90s, and so you're a decade earlier than that, at least. Yeah. And I joke a lot on the show about how miserable it is, but you know, it was a rough game in the 70s. Like, and not a lot of people doing it, especially like, you know, any sort of steep technical ice. As you got into ice climbing and mountaineering, you would have been unusual in the fact that you're a woman. Your personality always comes across as like very forward, get it done, gung-ho. I don't know if gung-ho is the right word, but maybe there's more method to it than that. So what was it like entering any sort of like climbing scene, especially in a place, you know, dyed-in-the-wool place like Vermont? Not just as a woman, but how do you get into a climbing scene that's basically hiding out in ice gullies, you know, in the middle of winter up there? Or was there like clubs? Did you join alpine clubs, those sorts of things at the school? How
right.
In other words, how did your entry into that scene look at that time? How did you find people to climb with?
Right. It was a real adventure. Each day was a real adventure. And so I joined the outing club so that I could borrow gear. So I had my mom's hiking boots that she gave me that were flimsy summer hiking boots that were too big for me. They were leather boots. And I had a pair of strap-on crampons, and I didn't know there was a right and a left, so they kept falling off my feet in the middle of a pitch. So I was mostly following until I got the gear thing sorted out and quit falling, right?
Right.
And at that time, my first tool I borrowed was a wooden axe, and then you had like a little hammer, because you needed a little hammer to take the screws out. So it was pretty much that combo for a long time. I mean, I remember the hummingbird came out, because at first I used to bang my index finger a lot. My index finger would stay swollen and purple all winter, and I asked my partner if I was going to get arthritis, and he said, well, that's just part of it. We all will.
Yeah.
And so then with the hummingbird, then I learned more of a wrist flick, so quit banging that knuckle. But yeah, that was kind of the setup. And then we had these umbilical cords, these leashes that we made ourselves that you could tighten and hang on, because like to put in a screw was really hard, and you would have to hang on your tools to put in a screw. And eventually the screws got better, so that we ended up you could get a wrench, and then you could have a little slot cut out for it, of the socket,
right,
so that you could get that on the eye of the screw and use that wrench to turn the screw, because these screws didn't turn. And so, I mean, it would take hours to lead a pitch.
Right.
And I heard stories of one guy leading this pitch at Poco Moonshine, and it took him, like maybe the first pitch of Positive Thinking or something, it took him hours to lead a pitch. So after every screw, before he took off from that screw, he would smoke a cigarette and then take off to the next place to stop and put in another screw, and put in a screw and have a cigarette, and then he'd take off and put in the next screw. So you would start these days like early in the morning, early before the sun came up, post hole in. You'd always be post holing in to get to a climb, say in Smuggler's Notch, a 2 or 3 pitch climb, I remember, because the ropes were shorter, and then you'd get to the top, and then you'd have to start rapping down, and always hope that your ropes would pull and stuff, and then get down, and then you'd glissade down through the woods, and then hike back to the truck, and then we'd go off and get some Boone's Farm wine and ice cream sandwiches, and it'd be late by then, 8 o'clock at night.
After all that, you wanted ice cream. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was the beginning, I guess, of it all, huh?
Yeah, that was a typical day back in those days.
Right. That's a classic. The only time I've seen the cigarette thing is aid climbing, actually. Yeah. For like 8-hour leads.
Right.
Stopping in the middle and rolling one up for the smoking. Did you get through college doing all this sort of stuff, or did the road call you sooner than that?
No, I finished college a semester early, and by that time I decided I wanted to learn more about alpine climbing, so in the winter time. So I made up this plan that I was going to live out of my Subaru, and I was going to spend January in Colorado, February in Wyoming, March in the Cascades, and April in the Palisades. And I was going to live on $3,000 a year, so I decided I would take out $3,000 of traveler's checks, and then when I worked during the year, I would set it aside in the bank for the next year. So I had this budget, so I had like $14 a week for food, so that meant no beer, there was no movies or anything, and then no ice cream sandwiches. No ice cream sandwiches. No, I had
a pure Snickers diet. Is that
well, I thought it was going to be like all pasta and pancakes, and I did have these homemade pancakes that were so dense, like you couldn't finish 2, so you'd like stuff the other one in your pocket to nibble on the rest of the day. Right? They were super dense. But anyway, but I learned that vegetables are pretty cheap actually, and so I learned to eat a lot of vegetables. And I figured, well, I want to be organized because I hate losing stuff. So if you have too much stuff, it's easy to lose stuff, or not be able to find your things, and especially if you're living out of a car, and it can just be annoying. So I just had 2 of everything I needed. So I had like 2 pairs of socks, 2 pairs of long pants, 2 sweaters, and so that was all. It was all set up. So it was super sort of self-contained.
Sure.
Yeah.
And so, the internet has seems like it's always been here. It hasn't. And so in the late 70s or early 80s, what was it? Had we transitioned to the 80s by now?
Yeah.
Going through college? Okay. So either way, really? The climbing community was spread out. It was regional. There was kind of these publications like Climbing Magazine and a few others at the time that sort of brought everything together. But how
when you're looking at a road trip now, it's like you can go to Indian Creek and know that there's going to be folks there for sure in March, more than you want.
Yeah.
You know you can go. What did planning this trip look like, and how are you networking for partners? What was your inspiration for that in terms of, you picked out these places, there's climbing there. What was networking looking like for you to get, to find people to climb with, like rolling into someplace?
Yeah, for one thing, I didn't read climbing in magazines or any books because it just made me too antsy because I didn't want to read about it. I just wanted to be doing it. So, and I had 2 friends in Colorado and 1 in Wyoming. So, one friend was in Boulder and 1 friend was in Colorado Springs. So I went to Colorado Springs first and looked up my friend, and she wasn't an alpinist. So I'm like, okay, fine, I'll just go do it by myself. And I didn't know what to do. So I thought, well, I'll just go do the 14ers or something. So I thought I would start with Pikes Peak. So this was in the middle of the winter, or early winter, early January. So I drove up the road as far as I could till it was closed. And then I got out of the car and just started walking up the road. And then it was really windy, so I had to start walking backwards. So I was walking backwards up the road towards the summit, and I thought, this isn't it. This isn't how you climb. This isn't alpine climbing. So I went back to the car and drove to Boulder to find my next friend. So my next friend...
I don't read climbing magazine, but I'm pretty sure this is not what I'm looking for.
This is not it. So my friend in Boulder, he's like, nah, I don't do any of that stuff, but my girlfriend's roommate does, one of her roommates. So I'll introduce you to him. So it turned out that was Charlie Fowler.
Ah, right on.
Yeah, and so, I didn't know Charlie was famous or anything, but anyway, yeah, I went and I met Charlie, and so then I'm like, hey, Charlie, you want to go climbing? He's like, yeah, but he's like, you want to go where? And I said, oh, well, I was thinking about Rocky Mountain National Park. And he said, well, really, do you have like any AT ski gear? I'm like, yeah. He was surprised. Do you have a beacon? Yeah. Do you have like an ice axe and crampons? Yeah. So he's like, okay, we'll go then, So we went in to climb the standard route on Spearhead or something. And we skied in there and set up my tent. And then I said, I want to learn how to dig a snow cave. And he said, okay, well, you just go out and start digging and let me know. I'll come check up on you after a bit. And I'm like, no, that's not it. So he didn't teach me how to dig a snow cave. But, and so I spent a few weeks there.
What was he going to do?
Yeah, right.
Hang out, smoke some weed.
Yeah, I don't.
Get the snow cave done.
Yeah, probably. And so anyway, after a couple weeks, I left there and came to Ouray. Actually, This was like in 1982, and then after that month was up, then I went to Wyoming and actually ran into another climber who I knew from home, and he actually introduced me to another climber who. Lyle Dean, who became one of my mentors, climbing partners and mentors, and then sort of I took it from there and was just able to meet one person who would know another person, but it was really hard to find people who were interested in going alpine climbing in the wintertime.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I imagine.
Yeah.
So yeah, this big formative road trip. Were you also thinking in terms of like, finding some place to be then, in terms of a place to live, or did you imagine at this point like an endless year by year, $3,000 a year life for the rest of your life?
I was content with an endless $3,000 a year for the rest of my life. Yeah.
So how did that evolve then to, you don't live in your Subaru anymore now. Where did that sort of lead, and when did A, you find a place to be, and B, one thing about the road trip and the $3,000 a year is it often doesn't afford you the ability to go and international, or once you start dreaming of great big trips. So that must have been in your head at some point of like, I'd like to go to Nepal. I'd like to go to some of these other places. So
where is that? Where does this road trip lead, as it were?
Yeah, I realized pretty fast that different mountain ranges had different things to teach me. Mm-hmm. So I wanted to check out different mountain ranges besides the Rockies and the Cascades. I never made it down to the Palisades because it was a massive storm that year. But I ended up, I figured the only way to be able to afford to go climbing internationally was either to get a job as a guide or become a sponsored climber. Mm-hmm. And so I decided, the easiest thing for me to do was to become a guide.
Okay.
So I did in 1985 for the American Alpine Institute. Mm-hmm. And I had already climbed on my own in Peru and in Alaska. And when I got hired on in 85, they sent me straight away to guide in South America. And then I got to guide for them in Alaska more and also in Nepal. Mm-hmm. And I got to see Asia, the Himalayas for my first time. And had a lot of great opportunities guiding for them. A lot of great opportunities, mm-hmm. Great learning experience for me. And so I guided for them mostly overseas for a number of years, still living out of my car. So I lived out of my car for 7 years.
Okay.
And then I finally decided that I wanted somewhere to be. Mm-hmm. And I couldn't commit to a boyfriend. I wasn't willing to make the sacrifices that involved unless we were married.
Okay.
So that's what happened.
Okay.
I found somebody that I fell in love and I wanted to be married, and at the same time I was willing to give up, and I was ready to give up living out of a car.
Right. Yeah. I don't know. Most people find themselves ready at some point to stop living in a car. Most people, some people don't, I suppose. But yeah, so you got married. You ended up did you end up sort of based out of the Northwest then?
No, Colin had a year left in school in Yale, up in New Haven.
Oh, okay.
At Yale. And then he got an internship, fellowship residency at University of Washington.
Okay.
Yeah.
So then you were out that way.
Yeah.
Right. Okay, cool. So when in this era, like you have 7 years, you're working as a guide, and you mentioned Lyle Dean as a mentor. Who else could you cite in there, kind of helping you along the way in terms of, or was there maybe if not mentors, were there solid partners? Were there people that you could cite as other mentors, or were you really freelancing around with partners and trips and things like that?
I would say Lyle had the biggest influence on me for sure.
Right. In terms of just teaching you, creating some sort of ethic in you about how you approach the mountains and things like that, or simply technical stuff as well.
It was an approach, I would say. Right. He's a minimalist, and he is also he believes in his approach is you need to do your homework, you need to be prepared.
Mm-hmm. Well, it sounds like that would be somewhere where you guys kind of found each other, because based on your plan for living out of your car and everything else, it seems like your personality was already kind of sorted in that direction.
Yeah, it kind of was.
Yeah, because if you're making all these plans and budgeting, and most people, not most maybe, but a lot of people just throw their crap in the car and go and hope it all worked out. And so it's funny because the mentors, they influence you, but I think the way you guys probably connected was he probably saw this in you already, so you weren't driving him nuts as a partner, or whatever. Like you were receptive to his ideas, as it were.
For sure. And I don't know if, alpinism was used as a tool to develop me as a person, mm-hmm. or if I was already had those traits that are required of an alpinist.
Mm-hmm. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, there has to be some mixture of nurture and nature.
Yeah.
Like everything else in the world, right? That you were drawn to it. So let's get a little bit into maybe philosophically, what do you think, kind of building off of what we just talked about, but, what do you think in sort of your soul, or whatever you want to call it, is
being fed by the mountains? What is it that draws you to that and to this winter ice climbing idea? Versus while you're probably a very skilled and avid rock climber at times, this is what's defined your climbing is mountains and snow and being cold, actually. What do you, if you had to sort of put it into words, if you can.
So I feel like sort of that we're given these gifts and my calling is to be an alpinist, I suppose. Mm-hmm. And the thing that I really appreciate about alpinism is that for me, I think it's important to live each day as if it's your last, because it might be. And you especially realize that in the mountains. What that does for me is, one, it helps me always try to think about my priorities in terms of what's most important in my life. And relationships is, has got to be the most important thing. And then also to be grateful. I think alpinism has taught me to be grateful for the small things. And I think if you're appreciative, then you live a much more happy and fulfilled life.
Okay. So when you're thinking about yourself, and this is also part of an evolution, we just talked about doing your homework, being methodical. What else do you think you bring to the game in terms of as a partner? Like, what do you think your strengths are, if you've ever reflected on this? And also, we're talking about a career that's going on, what? We'll do the math, 40 years.
A lot of years.
Yeah, right? So what do you think is, made you, like I said, a good, solid partner in the mountains, but also, aside from luck, because it's, we know alpinism has this little moments of luck over the years, has allowed you not just longevity in the fact that you're still alive, but longevity in that you're still drawn to it. It's still something that's feeding you. You're not burned out. You're not tired. You're still going, as it were. What do you think? A, makes you a great partner. B, has made you just keep doing this thing and loving it.
Okay. So, I think my strength is determination, and, everything's a double-edged sword, right? It's also your greatest weakness sometimes, but I feel like I've been able to encourage my partners when they had doubts, and so I think that's been the biggest thing that I bring to the table as a partner, is that I'm determined. I think we can do it. I have this confidence. I have this vision. And if my partner ever expresses any doubts, I think that we can have a conversation to discuss the risks. But I think that I've been able to be really encouraging when it's been critical. And at the same time using good judgment. Right. So I think that's my strength. I think that in terms of my longevity in alpine climbing, this was something that I had to revisit recently during Hayden Kennedy's slideshow that we talked about, which was one of the best that I've ever heard. And he talked about motivation, and that really hit me hard because I recently started alpine climbing again a couple years ago after having gone 10 years without being in the mountains. Okay. And I'm considering going back again. And so I went straight home and called Michael, his dad, and started talking to him about the things that were bothering me. And one of them was this question of motivation. How do you know that your motivation is pure? In alpine climbing, it's really important because the risk is so serious. And I think there's an even greater risk if your motivation isn't pure. And so, because you would make decisions for the wrong reasons. And it would color your judgment. So he said that when he decided to quit alpine climbing, he knew because the spark was gone. He just... and he knew right away. And so it just wasn't worth the risk because the spark was gone. And I knew what he was talking about then, because when I went back into the mountains a couple years ago, on an expedition to India, I thought, well, I don't know if I'm going to still like this or not, if this is me or not. It doesn't matter to me either way. I don't have anything invested in it. My I've already hit the peak of my career. So, I could go either way. I don't care. Just be interesting to see. And as just an objective observer. And it was actually, one of the funnest times of my life. Mm-hmm. And so I knew then when I thought about that and talked to Michael that I still have that spark, and it's okay with me when it goes away. I'll just quit. It's all right, or if some other circumstances demand that I quit, that's okay with me. But I'm definitely grateful for the experiences that I've had, the partnerships that I've enjoyed, and the lessons that I've learned in alpine climbing. Been tremendous, more than I ever dreamed of. Because when I was a kid, when I was in high school, I remember talking to my French teacher saying, why should I be taking this course? Why should I apply myself? I'm never going to be working for some business that's going to send me overseas. And little did I know, that I was going to become a mountain guide and be sent to less developed countries. Mm-hmm. And I never dreamed that this is the path that my life would take.
Right. What did that kid talking to their French teacher think their life was going to be? Like what your parents had assumed? You'd get married and settle down, have some kids? Yeah. I mean, I had no idea, I was just having fun skiing and being outside in the mountains. And I did a lot of running but I had no idea, and I wasn't really worried about it. But yeah, you aren't. Yeah. So the 10 years you said you were off. Are you more referring to like going into big mountain expeditions, or were you not climbing at all? No, it was just big mountain expeditions. So you were still focused on ice climbing and in the States and rock climbing and things like that. Yeah. Okay, so we're referring to like these, these big draining expeditions. And alpine climbing, which is a lot more risky. Yeah, and more risky. Mm-hmm. Was there anything specifically that pushed you to stop 10 years, or in that 10 years prior, or did it just fade out and you were busy doing other things? It just didn't happen. I mean, Jay, Smith, my husband, went off and went to Alaska with some other climbing partners that were as good or better than him, and so I'm just like, okay, well, I'll just stay home and hang out with my son, Okay. All right. And, because this would have been all through his, sort of middle school, teen years. Yeah, exactly. Okay. So that would be important as well. Yeah. So I just looked at it as an opportunity to spend time with him. Right. Was there any sort of risk assessment that you'd made? And like, when you just mentioned Michael's comment was like, the spark, not only is has to be a spark, but with alpine climbing, if you're cognizant, and I think the older you become, the more cognizant you become. It's easy to just ignore all the risk when you're 22, 23. Mm-hmm. The spark not only has to be there, but it has to be strong enough to talk those things down. Because obviously, if Michael, and he's a skier, if he could be magically transported into the mountains, he would go there because he loves it. What he decided, obviously, was like, look, the risk is there and it's not strong enough. Did you do any assessment like that in terms of the risk involved, or was it more subtle or subconscious than that in terms of avoiding those trips, or did it just logistically not work out that you could get on any trips while you're in this sort of period? No, this all has to do with feelings, and I questioned Michael about that, because about the risk thing, because he takes just as much risk when he goes backcountry skiing every day, and he knows that. And so it's not, for him, it wasn't about the risk. It was totally about the feeling, about the joy, about the feeling like you belong there at that time and place. Mm-hmm. And so for me, I think that, I've had a lot of conversations and thought a lot about risk and is this worth it, or is this being selfish or whatever. But the thing is that you can't change a person. It's not right. Like, I've heard stories of people saying, well, if we're going to continue to be married, this doesn't happen between my husband and myself, but between other couples, right? A spouse might say, you can't continue to go on these expeditions because it's selfish. What if you get killed? What about me?
What about the kids? Well, the fact is that you're just telling that person that they can't continue to be who they are. And who they are is what they bring to the table in terms of the knowledge, the wisdom, the direction, the relationship between that person and their spouse and that person and their kids. So if you as a person decide, I'm going to put these things on the shelf, even though this is not who I am, I'm going to put these things on the shelf, that's a personal decision that can't be criticized or judged by anybody else. You know, whether you decide to continue to climb or take risks while you're a parent or in a relationship or not. Because, you know, you could validly say, I need to live my life, and through these experiences, I become a wiser person who can then can help my kid when he or she is going through challenges that they inevitably will. I'll have the experience and the judgment to be able to guide them instead of just putting your whole life on the table. That's one way of looking at it. And if that's the way you feel, nobody can say anything against that.
Right.
Because that's who you are, and you have to live the life that you've been called to live. And I think it's important to reevaluate it all the time. But at the same time, I have a hard time with people saying that's selfish or whatever.
I wanted to ask you a little bit about, I kind of asked about it earlier because I was trying to imagine this, somewhat petite, Southern girl. You've got the accent, and you're kicking around in Vermont trying to become an ice climber. It might have been a little shocking to, and probably a little bit of like eye rolling to some of the hardcore, probably mostly dudes up there. Over your career, as a woman who was into alpine climbing when there weren't a lot, and it's definitely grown in your career. Do you have any sort of thoughts on whether or not that was something was really noticeable to you, or were you just like headstrong enough to be like, take me as I am? I don't want to hear about any sort of sexism or gender ideas. And then segging into the fact that you are part of the Chicks with Pics program and all that sort of stuff, which I'd like to talk to you about. So, what's your perspective on being a woman in this game for so long and watching the transition of climbing where there's a lot more, I think there's a lot more women doing it, although, I don't know what the ratio in alpine climbing is still, but do you have perspectives on that in terms of your place in that sort of pantheon of women, climbers that have achieved so much? In terms of Himalayan, you've climbed 8,000 meter peaks for the first time, those sorts of things.
When I first started rock climbing, ice climbing, alpine climbing, I guess I was oblivious and naive, and it didn't really enter my mind that I was unique. Mm-hmm. And all my partners were men, and I enjoyed that. I enjoy their company, and I feel like I was pretty much treated as an equal or treated well.
Okay.
And working with Chicks with Pics was probably the first time that I really started climbing with women more than men. And on my expeditions, I noticed a difference between having a woman on the expedition and not. It was always nice to have another woman on the expedition. There were never more than 6 of us, 2 to 6. But climbing more with women, once I started working with chicks, I noticed the differences in general in the relationships. And that's been pretty interesting. For example, when you're, climbing even just a sport pitch with another woman, generally they're watching you, maybe cheering you on at the crux. You definitely feel that vibe, and a lot of times, and these are stereotypes, but still, a lot of times climbing with the man, they're sort of not really paying attention. They might be figuring out what they're going to lead next, when you get done with your pitch, as soon as you get done with your pitch or whatever.
Sure.
And so, I don't know, that's a little different. And I think that it's made me a better climber, though, realizing that, because now what I do is I never look down at my belayer. Mm-hmm. I never expect any interaction from my belayer, because it's really important for you as a climber, when you're leading, to be focused on what you need to do, instead of thinking about the belayer or whatever. Sure. And so I've tried to develop that focus to the point that, if I'm on the crux and my belayer's fumbling through their pack looking for a jacket or ripping open a candy bar, I don't even hear it. Like, I try not to even hear it because I'm so focused on what I'm doing. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's really important it makes you better calmer if you can develop that kind of focus.
Sure.
Yeah.
So you're part owner of Chicks with Picks?
Yeah.
Okay. And can you talk a little bit about the philosophy and what that organization's doing, what you guys are kind of, why you bought into it, why you saw potential there, and what do you think it does?
Mm-hmm. So Kim Reynolds saw this niche. It's been 18 or 19 years ago, I think. And there just weren't many women out ice climbing, or if they were just climbing with their boyfriends or husbands, and they weren't actually setting up the anchors or leading the routes. Mm-hmm. And so she saw an opportunity. And women learn better in an all-women's environment because they're less intimidated. They feel more free to ask questions. And that's how you learn the quickest, is by asking questions. Mm-hmm. So she created these all-women's events, and we have sponsors who help us run these events. It's been really successful. So I started working with her from the very beginning, and then a year and a half ago, myself, Elena Renz, Dawn Glantz, Angela Haas, and Karen Bockel bought the business. And our mission is to educate and empower women through mountain sports, to develop community, and to foster environmental stewardship. Okay. And it's pretty exciting for us because we have added international trips, and we have also added backcountry skiing and alpine climbing to the mix. Mm-hmm. And we've had a lot of recognition and support within the industry, and also from our sponsors and also from the media. So it's been pretty exciting. Right. Yeah. And so I mean, if you were to sort of if someone were to come to you and ask you what like the experience would be of going to one of these classes, if I was, if some woman was interested, like what is your like 1 minute pitch in terms of what the experience would be like? Okay, so this is for women of all levels who they've never climbed or skied before in the backcountry, and they just want to, and they're intrigued. They want to find out more about it. Also for women who have climbed, but they want to learn to be self-sufficient. Okay. Or it's for women who are climbing, but they want to learn to lead. Mm-hmm. Or women who are climbers or skiers, but they don't have time to set up the logistics to do an international trip, like ice climbing in Iceland or backcountry skiing in Japan. So they come to us, and we're all about small ratios. So for climbing, it's no more than 4-to-1. In the backcountry, it's 2-to-1, and long hours. So it's real intense, and they learn a lot in those. Usually the courses are 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6 days, and I feel like they walk away feeling like they've definitely become more self-sufficient and definitely more empowered, and also that they've developed a network, or they're part of a greater network of women where they can find partners anywhere they go. Do you see them out there? Do you hear about it? Absolutely. Everywhere, all the time, little cells of these Chicks alumni are floating around. Right. Getting stuff done. Yeah. For real. Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. What's the influence been on you in terms of teaching these women, or being part of the, even if you want to talk about just in the last year and a half, being part owner of this organization? Was that a big change for you as someone, had been kind of like as a guide, you're a little bit of a mercenary in terms of, not having to kind of run the front business end of things. What has the experience of being super involved in it changed you at all? Well, I actually got an MBA at University of Washington.
Okay.
So I've always had this, because it seemed like a practical thing in case anything ever happened to me and I couldn't guide anymore.
You're very,
Yep.
you're very, you get your ducks in a row, do you
That's
not?
right. I do.
Okay,
Yeah,
good.
yeah. If it's not obvious, I'll just say that.
Toss this MBA in the pack,
Yeah.
in case I need it later.
Right.
20 years from now or whatever.
Got to be prepared, right? And so people can read me like a newspaper,
That's what we're here for. Let's get the inner workings.
Yeah. So the biggest change for me, I think, is that I used to spend most of my time around men, and now it's probably mostly around women. And I never was really a feminist. I don't know if I'm a feminist now, but I do recognize that women have a lot of are juggling a lot of things on the plate. I used to think that, or aspire to be a super mom, and thought I could be, like the perfect housewife, the perfect mom, the perfect business person, the perfect athlete. I could do it all, and I realized that I couldn't, and I shouldn't even aspire to that. And I think that there are a lot of women who do and put a lot on themselves, And I think that when there are a lot of opportunities, like a lot of opportunities have opened up for women these days, that there can be conflict in terms of striking a balance, and I also feel like there's still some ceilings. There's still some expected roles or expected levels of performance or whatever that are being broken, but there are still some sort of self-concepts maybe, or self-image that needs to be gone, and the way we deal with each other in relationships and understand each other. And I think that climbing I've seen it help women in all kinds of ways in terms of, say, for example, in a marriage. We had a participant who was an engineer from the Southeast, and so she had already broken ceilings, but when she went climbing with her husband, he would sort of always be telling her what to do, but she was a really good climber and telling her how to do it, right? And so she was she knew she could lead, and all I needed to do was show her a couple things in terms of technique and in terms of systems management, and she'd be a lot more efficient. And so she said, what do I do when I go back climbing with my husband? And I said, well, tell him if he respects you at all, not to say anything while you're leading.
Right.
And so she did, and he didn't say anything, and she just, climbed beautifully and set the system up, quickly and efficiently. And I think and then it sounds like he had a newfound respect for her, and it changed their marriage even, translated into their marriage. And so that's an example of the way that these women can walk away feeling empowered, and it affects their personal lives. It can affect their work lives. It can affect them in terms of being willing to speak out for the environment. And there's increase in pressure on the environment now. And just in terms of increase in numbers, of recreational users, but also different types of uses of the land. And then, in terms of climate change, in terms of the, administration, whoever's in the administration. And I think that women can use this power to speak out and for things that they care about, and I think maybe this sort of maternal instinct, becoming stewards, being good stewards of the land is something that women could latch on to and could make a difference. And so I think it's an exciting time for women right now.
I wanted to ask you, as we sort of go out here, this methodical person, I think you very much present a leadership sort of personality to me, in the way you just talked about chicks, like it's very much this leadership personality. But you also told me a story, Ari, and I kind of wanted to come back to it maybe to finish. Climbing El Cap, climbing Tangerine Trip, where you suddenly kind of needed some support. And when you told me the story, you almost sounded a little surprised by it. Can you sort of talk Tell me that one more time, recounting, you know, the part on the trip where you dropped all your hooks.
Yeah, right. So, one of my partners, Karen Bachla, and I decided to climb Tangerine Trip. It was my idea, but Karen is game for adventure, and she had only climbed El Cap once. I think she followed somebody up the nose in a day or something like that. But she was game, and she's definitely got the skills to figure things out. She's spent a lot of time. She's a certified guide. She's been on rescue. She was getting a graduate degree in physics. So I'm like, okay, she can figure this out. So
it's just physics.
Yeah, right.
I mean, especially aid climbing.
Yeah,
just physics.
Yeah, and it was a bit stressful. This was our second attempt, because the first attempt we had to go down because she had just been recovering from knee surgery, and she wasn't recovered enough to be on that wall. And so I made her promise to come back again with me the next spring, and she did. And we had gotten to the top of the fourth pitch, and that fourth pitch is a pretty stressful pitch because there's a downward traverse, you know, and it can be pretty dicey if you don't do things the right way. Had already been a death on it. And we got we were at the top of the fourth and hauled up our bags, and the next day we started up the fifth pitch, which is the crux, and it was a hard lead for me. I'm not that experienced of an aid climber yet, and I'd taken this whipper upside down, and it was pretty scary, and gotten back up, finished that pitch, and I actually broke the fifth pitch up into two pitches because it's super long and sustained diagonal pitch, and then led the sixth pitch that required a lot of hooking, and it was just getting dark. I had a bunch of my hooks on different beaners on my chest strap, and so I could get to them easily, just like you get to a stopper and figure out which size. And I had to pee really bad, so
it's weird how when you're like, you've been gripped,
yeah,
as soon as you're not,
yeah,
like,
you gotta go.
You get, like, as soon as I'm standing on the ground or something, yeah, it's like the most important thing is to take a leap,
right?
Immediately,
real bad,
yeah. Which 2 seconds later, before, you weren't even thinking about it.
No, you're right. Focused. And so I undid the chest strap to hang the harness on the anchor so I could pee, and then I heard this ding, 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 and all my hooks fell to the ground because they were on this chest strap that I didn't see. It was dark, and I was So when Karen got up, I hadn't done anything. I'd hauled up the bags, but I hadn't set up the portaledge. I was just sitting there, and I was feeling pretty down, pretty dejected. And I just said, Karen, I dropped all the hooks, and she just patted me on the back, and she said, it's going to be okay. Let's just put up the portaledge. And so I'm just like, okay, I'll do whatever you say. And then that night, after we were laying down, I came up. I was able to sort of recollect and come up with another plan. I decided, well, I can hook off my nut tool, but I only have one nut tool, and there's a lot of hooking and on the next pitch. So then I thought, well, I'll just I have a bunch of beaks, so I'll try hooking off beaks. And so I told her my plan, and we did it. But I think that I'm just figuring out my leadership style. I've felt like the greatest experiences I've ever had before was actually on Makalu, and that was, we were a team of 6, and we spent 60 days on that route, and we did like the second or third ascent of the West Pillar, which is super technical, and the only reason it felt like a team accomplishment, there was just the synergy of all of us working together, and that's been the time in my life, the one time where I felt the extreme high that you can get off of being able to work together as a team, the synergy that can come, and I'm hoping to feel that again from the teamwork that we can realize through Chicks, the 5 different owners, because there's such talent diverse talent, diverse personalities, and just bringing that all together will be a tremendous accomplishment. And I really enjoy the dynamics of teamwork, and especially small teams, and the dynamic that I felt with Karen on climbing El Cap. That was the dynamic that occurred allowed us to be able to do that. Mm-hmm. Even though she wasn't the one leading all the pitches, it was her interaction with me that enabled me to get us together as a team. And that's, I really think that, especially on alpine expeditions where you're really working together as a team, or multi-pitch climbs where you're really working together as a team, that's, it's a real feeling that I get a real high off of. I mean, you don't always get that in the sport climbing dynamic. It depends on your partner and how on your partner.
Right.
Sometimes it can be kind of a individual.
Well, a lot of times you're not even climbing on the same route. It's like you're trying yours, and then you walk over and the other person's trying theirs. So you're on a definitely separate day mission.
Yeah, and
you meet up at the base and then,
right. And your performance shouldn't depend on that person's encouragement. Like it does in chicks for sure, but I try to tell the chicks, like, hey, when you go out in the real world, you may not get that, and you're still going to have to be able to perform. Right. You're going to have to be able to get it from inside yourself. Mm-hmm. And so on individual pitches, I try not to depend on anything from my partner in terms of support. All has to come from me. But definitely there's situations where where it comes into play, and it's tremendous. And just the interpersonal relationships are extremely fulfilling.
Well, yeah, it sounds like you have a lot to learn still with this program and getting that all going. So that's got to be sort of exciting as well.
It's real exciting because we believe in ourselves, but our alumni believe in us. Mm-hmm. Our sponsors believe in us. The media believes in us, and so it's the same kind of support like that I felt from Karen. That's going to be being able to work together with all these different stakeholders is going to help us accomplish things that we've never even thought of, that we've never even dreamed possible, and that's what's cool.
All right, well, thanks a lot for sitting down.
Yeah.
This has been super fun, and we had a couple little technical up and downs, but I think we got something really great here.
Yeah.
And I'm glad we ran into each other up here in Cody.
Me too.
So thanks a lot, Kitty.
Yeah, thank you.
All right, folks, thanks for listening, and thanks to Kitty for sitting down. Goodness gracious, a legend, that woman. And you can check out what she's got going on with Chicks with Pics at chickswithpics.net. Information about courses and everything else. You can spend some time with Kitty in the future if you want. That'd be pretty damn cool. It was for me. Okay, folks, I know you've heard it before, but in case somebody's new to the gang, you can go to enormocast.com and click on the Help Out tab. See what you can do to help the podcast advertise itself in some cases. You can also donate if you wish. Donations along with sponsorship keep this thing alive, and in some ways put num-nums directly in to the Enormo baby's mouth with your patronage. So check that out, enormocast.com, Help Out tab. All right, folks, we are in the middle season. Some rock climbing, maybe some ice climbing left somewhere. It feels pretty warm out here in the west. Things are falling down, I believe. But we're rolling into the springtime. So please, if you're like me, you might not have used some of these skills for a little bit, right? You've been skiing or you've been training in your deep training cave, and you just haven't been out there on the ropes. So as you get back into it, it is time to do a quick brush up and review. Use your communication. Make sure you know everything that's going on before you leave the ground. And of course, you and your partner better check your knot and check each other's too.
I have come here to chew bubblegum and kick ass. all out of bubblegum.